A couple of days ago here at Tech Yeah City, we took a look at X99, the platform that is over a decade old, but if you're lucky enough, you can find a really good deal on the used market on not just the CPUs, but also the motherboards, especially if they're local deals. Now on eBay, we've talked about this in a previous video, eBay prices for good X99 motherboards are pretty stupid. They're pretty high. I wouldn't personally entertain them myself, but locally you can find a really good bargain on these boards. And that's because they carry support for 6-core and 8-core CPUs. However, today we're going to be overclocking an i7-6850K, which is 6 cores and 12 threads. And in the previous video that we took a look at with it, we coupled it with an RTX 5060 Ti, which was a 16GB GPU from NVIDIA. However, it's only got X8 PCIe support truly at the core of the card. Despite having a finger on it that looks like it's X16, it's actually truly an X8. And this, I believe, caused issues for the Asus motherboard, the workstation board that we were using, because it just flat out would not work at all on this board, regardless of what we did in the settings. And then we tried it on another motherboard and it gave out some pretty flaky results depending on the game and the settings. And it was up until now I decided that I'd try a few different graphics cards out to see what was going on here. And actually there was a graphics card in particular that is new and you can get it, and its prices are pretty good nowadays. And it does give out, as we see later in the benchmarks, quite impressive performance. And this is the RX 9060 XT 16GB, where I decided to just overclock the i7-6850K and then just compare it to the 9800 X3D, just in a head-to-head. And also I decided to include some of the default settings to see how much you can get out of these older i7-6850K CPUs and also i7-X99 CPUs in general. It's going to be a pretty good indicator because they do have a lot of overclocking headroom. However, there are some tricks to get good, smooth, comfortable overclocks, which we'll talk about very soon, right after today's video sponsor, which is VIP SCD Keys, where if you want to get a single end user license that's going to last the lifetime of your motherboard and you're not going to get any risk of getting deactivated, then today's video sponsor is got the keys you want, where they are going out at really good prices too if you use the coupon code BFTYC. Now they've got Windows 11 Pro Home. They've also got 10, 11 LTSC, which are my personal favorite versions of Windows, bloat free. And of course, you can get activated almost instantly after you pay. I'll put the links in the description below, as well as that coupon code BFTYC. Don't forget to use it for a big, fat, juicy discount. So now it's time to move into overclocking X99 before we get onto these results, where it can be a little bit tricky with this platform, depending on how you look at it. For me personally, I'm going to show you guys the quick and easy way and the settings that I used in today's video, which involves just going into the BIOS when you boot up your PC, but then also making sure that you've got an expectation of not getting such great performance out of your memory. And what I mean by this was the platform itself, X99, it is over a decade old now. And so this means that the integrated memory controller is not that great. For instance, on a Ryzen, say 5900X, you might get 3600 megahertz DDR4 memory working just with a click of an XMP button. But on this platform, 3600 megahertz just will flat out not work, even if your memory sticks are really good. So this, the integrated memory controller on the CPU itself just can't support high memory speeds. However, I found personally it's a bit of a gamble. Speeds from my own testing range from around 2666 megahertz up to 3000 megahertz. And some people might be able to tune it a bit higher, but personally I found its stability range is around this area, especially with 4 sticks in total, which we've got 32 gigabytes in today's testing here. So the i7-6850K in particular, the one that we're using for today's video, we managed to settle on 2666 megahertz memory, and this made it so that it does leave a little bit to be desired, but since it is quad channel, it is a healthy outlay for bandwidth when it comes to utilizing even older DDR4 memory to this date. Now for the CPU itself and overclocking, we settled on a 4.3 gigahertz overclock, even though the previous generation Haswell CPUs can go all the way up to like 4.6 gigahertz pretty easy. You can even get those things up to 4.8 gigahertz. This one just pretty much had problems at 4.4 gigahertz, so we took it back down to 4.3 gigahertz just to get the benchmarks done. Now, in terms of Asus motherboards and voltages, here is where one tricky component is presenting itself, and that is if you want to tune your memory and you want to lock in XMP, you can do that, but then make sure, again, those memory speeds, you manually lock them in. And I'd start with 2666 first, and then I'd go up from there and see what you can do. But you've also got to manually set in the DDR4 RAM voltage, as well as 2 sub voltages below that. And the most important one here is the system agent voltage. You've got to manually set this as well. We decided to give it an offset and plus 0.3 volts here, which is actually quite a big boost, but that is needed for quad channel memory overclocking on this platform. Then for the CPU voltage itself, on Asus motherboards, they do a great job with the adaptive voltage, especially if you're just gaming and you're looking for quick and easy stability. If you are running an AFK simulator that's just CPU heavy, you of course will want to go with manual voltage and find a sweet spot for your CPU, which can be around for 4.3 to 4.4 gigahertz, around 1.25 to usually 1.3 volts. But the adaptive voltage here does a really good job since we're just gaming, and it's pretty much hassle-free. So good job on X99, the over decade long platform. Anyhow, let's get on to the benchmarking numbers here. Well, we'll start off with the first title, Fortnite, where we got the 9800X3D going at 1440p. Now, I'm going to show the 1440p high results first because they are pretty impressive this time around, where we're only missing out on 2 average FPS with our overclocked X99 configuration. Now, of course, default settings, we have a little bit more to be desired here. So a tuned X99 system versus a tuned latest and greatest Ryzen system does show you that X99 is not too bad at 1440p, especially high settings in Fortnite. Going down to 1080p, we do have a big gap here, but it's definitely not as bad as it was before when we were using the 5060 Ti, for instance, and especially since we're overclocking, we are gaining, as you can see here in the numbers, a huge chunk of performance. Even though it's 171 average FPS, I could still do some pretty decent plays on this game on the old but gold X99. Then moving on to Arc Raiders, 1440p high settings, we got very similar results here, though the 0.1% lows were a bit lower on the X99 system. And this is actually a thing in Fortnite too. I do have to point that out looking at these results. And then going on the 1080p, we do have a big difference. But again, just like Fortnite and versus the previous testing we did, there's actually not that bad of a gap as it once was. And then if we move over to the last game here, Counter-Strike 2, here is where we saw at 1440p not so big of a difference, high settings, but then if we went over to 1080p low settings, we did see quite a sizable chunk of performance being left on the table. And for some reason, Counter-Strike 2 1080p low settings on the 9060 XT 16GB does actually really well. It's probably a great card for Counter-Strike competitive players. But regardless, we've got the X99 last result to pull up here, and that's the power consumption, where if you're gaming, especially at 1440p, I decided to do some tests here, it actually wasn't too bad. The 9060 XT in general is a pretty power efficient GPU. It's actually one of the best out there at the moment. And then the CPUs themselves didn't equate too much of a difference when the results were pretty close too. So depending on your situation, the X99 CPU can be a decent option if you don't want to go out and say pay thousands of dollars for an RTX 5090, you just want to get one of those more mid-range graphics cards. And the 9060 XT from AMD right now, the 16GB variant, it's actually pretty well priced on both the markets, at least when I check in US, and also in Australia here. It's actually priced really well. And so with those gaming results done, we can see that if you want to play, say, 1440p high settings, and you want to get a mid-range graphics card, you can definitely take a look at some of these great used options on the market, especially if they're going to save you a few $100s. And even then you can look for a used graphics card too. But I decided to test out the 9060 XT 16GB because personally where I am locally, GPU prices on the used market are actually pretty bad. So if you do see that happening, you can go up and pick a good deal on an old X99 system or something around that era, overclock it a bit, and then you can go in and even add in a new graphics card and still get some pretty good performance and know that you're not missing out on a whole lot. Though I will point out, we did test with the 9800X3D, and that is the best gaming CPU out there. Well, there is the 9850X3D, but that just costs more money and it's basically the same thing. So used X99 and used parts, I am dusting off the cobwebs lately, both off myself and off the used parts, and seeing what they're capable of. And I hope you guys have been enjoying this content lately out of Tech Yes City. I'm going to definitely keep it coming to your sub boxes. So if you stayed this far and you're enjoying that content, you're not yet subbed, make sure to hit that sub button and ring that bell to get the content as soon as it drops. And with that aside, I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. If you've also got some requests or just general comments, chuck them down below. Love reading your thoughts and opinions as always. And with that aside, I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.